Whether you knew it was coming or it caught you by surprise, you're probably watching this video because you were recently laid off. Whether you got that physical envelope or all of a sudden a Zoom meeting was added to your calendar at the last minute, I just want to extend my deepest empathy and sympathy your way, because even if you know that there was nothing you could have done, it feels so hard to be subjected to a layoff or a job loss. I'm hoping that as we go through this video that you will feel a little bit less alone and have some guidance on what might be going on, how you can cope so that you can process through all the different waves of emotions that are likely hitting you. Let's just start there. It's okay to feel whatever you're feeling, and those feelings are going to change rapidly. Being laid off is incredibly tough. Allow me to be a clear voice that is telling you, you do not have to run off and apply to a million jobs right now. It's so important to tend to your mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And taking care of that will then give you the capacity to start working on finding the next steps in your career. If you're new here, my name is Lindsay. I'm a certified financial therapist, licensed social worker, and founder of the financial wellness business, Mind, Money, Balance. I help people understand money so that they can use it for good in their life. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to cope with job loss, how to deal with it, and how to help get you feeling better to prepare for whatever those next steps are. Of course, there is so much free content available at Mind, Money, Balance, so to make sure that you don't miss anything, make sure that you are following along in whatever way you prefer to receive your content. Zooming way out, let's just name that being laid off or losing your job is common. Even though it feels like a highly personal thing that happened to you, 40% of Americans have been laid off at some point in their life, and 28% of Americans have been laid off in the last 2 years. And with the news cycle doing what the news cycle does, it can feel like we are entering into a period of financial insecurity or instability and economic uncertainty, especially because the US had layoffs surging about 7% in March of 2024. Driven by technology-related and government sector job cuts. Even though that 7% is absolutely notable, what I want to also name is that that is still 5% lower than compared to last year, which means even though it was a big news cycle and you may have been involved in the technology or government layoffs from the spring, in general, we are in a pretty good job market. I know that doesn't help your unique situation, but I do think sometimes stepping back and understanding that you're not alone, and also generally speaking, we're in a pretty good place with the job market. But that doesn't stop most of us from being really worried about whether or not we will have our job, with 48% of Americans saying they experience layoff anxiety. Anticipatory anxiety, or anticipating that you will have something bad happen to you or anticipating you will feel anxious, is something that happens to all of us. For example, if a friend invites you over for a happy hour at their house, but you don't know that many people, you might be anxious thinking that you'll be anxious when you get to that party. That's the same thing that's happening with this layoff anxiety, is we are anticipating that this thing will happen to us, but we can't know for sure. When it comes to why people lose their jobs, there may be personal reasons such as not being able to fulfill the commitments or requirements of the job. But again, zooming way out, as technology advances and becomes more prevalent in every single sector, employers are looking at how can we cut the costs and reduce costs. That often looks like what they say, eliminating redundant positions. In the first quarter of 2024, positions that were eliminated because they were redundant or for cost-cutting reasons was responsible for over 66,000 people being laid off. Add on top of that, that brick and mortar stores are continuing to shrink down. That adds to additional job loss or anxiety over losing jobs. If you are like, those stats are great, but I want to know how I can deal it or what's going on, I just want to normalize for you that you're likely experiencing a wide range of emotions. And these emotions are likely going to come and go, and they will wax and wane in their intensity and in their duration. It's incredibly normal to have at first first that shock of feeling caught off guard or experiencing disbelief over what's happening, it's also very normal to feel angry, to be mad, to experience that like steam coming out of your ears and frustration towards the company or towards the situation. Sadness is another emotion that you might be experiencing, feeling that grief, loss, or despair over having lost your job. Fear is another common one, the fear of what will happen, especially in those first few moments when you're just getting your head around the idea that you've been laid off and you can't quite comprehend what does this actually look like from a financial reality standpoint. Am I getting a severance? What does that severance package look like? Can I tolerate floating my finances in order for me to take care of myself and my other responsibilities? There can be a lot of fear over that. Another big thing is guilt, feeling like somehow you brought this on yourself or you deserved it, or blaming yourself, which is a close cousin of shame. And shame is feeling embarrassed that this happened to you. In North America and in a lot of Western countries, we tend to tie so much of our identity and worth and belonging to what we do in our jobs or what we do as a career. So when we lose a job, it can feel like a hit, not just to your financial reality, but also to your identity, to your worth. So it makes sense that losing a job might trigger some of this shame. Anxiety, as I mentioned earlier, the worry over what might happen, what will my financial situation be like, how will I be able to find a job? All of those ruminating or spiraling anxious thoughts are incredibly normal. Frustration is another common sensation that can happen, feeling powerless, feeling trapped, feeling caught off guard, and resentment of your company for doing what they did to you, and resentment to your peers who didn't lose their jobs, or even resentment in general to people not at your company or your organization who are still gainfully employed. There might be that like twinge of envy or bitterness, which is totally normal. And you might not be alone if you're experiencing this nice sensation of relief, especially if you were feeling burnt out, overworked, underappreciated, or bored at work. This might be the time where you might just sit in that relief and name that it's okay to feel relief. And that actually might influence what you decide to do moving forward, being really clear about what wasn't working for you in your old role and being clear on what you do or don't want in your new job. Look, we have to start here by just labeling these feelings, naming that these emotions are incredibly normal, because it allows you to step back and decide, how am I going to deal with those emotions? What am I going to do with that frustration or anger? How am I going to cope with that guilt or that sadness? Remember that these feelings are temporary. Even though they're likely very intense, they are temporary. And naming them is the very first step in deciding, how do I want to respond to this? If you're experiencing that sadness and that frustration, and you're like, you know what I need to do, Lindsay? I just need to cry and be in my feelings. By all means, cry and be in your feelings. If you're feeling that anger and that frustration and you're like, I just need to pound the pavement and go for a run, by all means do that. Just be mindful of how you're processing those emotions, because when we experience that job loss, it's very common for our body to respond to it. And it's common for us in our culture to try and cope or help people cope with maybe less than helpful coping techniques, such as going out for drinks. Look, I'm not opposed to alcohol. I think everybody has a different relationship with it, but I think we need to be really mindful that if you're in that roller coaster space, that adding additional substances to it might not be the best choice. But again, you're human. It's totally okay if you're like, I need a drink or two, and know that this is just a temporary way that I'm processing this. It's not about judging you here if that's the way that you need to cope. The other thing with the grief and the loss and the sadness and the stress over identity is just realizing that there's a reason we use the term job loss interchangeably with layoff, because it is a loss for so many of us, especially those of us who are full-time employed. Our job is a literal part of our routine for 8 to 12 hours a day, depending on the type of job that you have. That is what you did. So now there's this literal void in your day, in your routine. And even if you felt like maybe you saw the layoff coming, maybe you were financially prepared, maybe you knew that it was on the horizon, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be a change in your routine. It's totally normal to feel that combination of emotions of, for example, feeling relief that you're not at a job that you didn't like anymore, but also sadness that that big piece of the way in which you moved through the world is temporarily gone. If you're feeling that grief, if you're feeling that loss, if you're feeling that sadness, it's totally normal. What do we do now? So I've named where layoffs come from, how it can literally feel in our brains and how it can feel emotionally. And I mentioned that it can also show up physically. So when it comes to that physical response to a job loss, I'm totally fine with anybody saying like, whatever, I'm going to sit on the couch, I'm going to cocoon up in my blanket and binge watch TV for a few days. That is what I need to do to cope with this. That's totally fine. We also want to be mindful that that's not like sliding into something new, because if we are sliding into some of that less helpful routine or lack of routine cycle, we just don't want it to become a bigger problem later on. So we want to make sure that, yes, we let ourselves feel our feelings, we let ourselves cocoon up and cope in the way that we need to cope. And we want to make sure that it is, time limited in some way, shape, or form. I'm not going to be the judge or the jury here to say this is how long you're allowed to feel your feelings and then after that move on. No, not at all. Rather, what I'm saying is give yourself permission to grieve and rage and have all of those emotions, and maybe even engage in some of those habits or activities that you normally wouldn't, and giving yourself a person to maybe help pull you out of it. So texting a friend maybe when you're laid off and saying, I'm going to be in my bed for a week, but what I need you to do is call me first thing on Friday, or make sure on Sunday that you come to my house and take me out for a walk. Sometimes just that external accountability can help us. So you're tending to your current needs, but you're also not sacrificing your future well-being because of the way that you're coping. So here are some tips, some actionable strategies that I would like to share with you. As always, take what works for you and leave the rest. Focusing on taking care of yourself. I mentioned at the top of the video that your mental and physical and emotional well-being should be prioritized pretty much always, but especially after experiencing a job loss. So give yourself that time to maybe sleep in and watch more TV than you normally do. Do whatever you need to do to tend to your nervous system and to kind of lick your wounds. Once you've spent some time kind of feeling your feelings, again, this is not about just like dusting it off and moving on, but also making sure that you're being kind to your physical and mental self. How are you currently kind to your physical and mental self? Do you go for walks once a day with your dog? Do you make sure that you're always making a smoothie? Do you make sure that you have friend dates on the calendar to make sure that you're engaging in social activity? What are the things that you do to make sure that you're tending to your overall well-being? And how can we make sure that those things continue to be a part of your routine? With a job loss, depending on the severance package you do or don't get, your financial situation might change. So be upfront with your friends that you want to keep those friend dates on the calendar, or you want to engage in those hobbies or those activities, and you need to be a little bit more mindful about spending in the short term. If you and your friends always go out for brunch, suggest doing a brunch at one of your houses, or suggest a movie together instead. Like thinking about other ways to keep those relationships active and nurturing yourself without dropping a lot of money on it. The next tip is to find things that you have control over. When we experience something like a job loss, it really can rock our world and make it feel like we have no control. So giving yourself ways to start and finish something can give us that sense of control and give us that sense of agency. Maybe it is starting and finishing a craft, a house project, or baking a tray of cookies, something that has a beginning, a middle, and an end that is low lift and also helps you to feel like, okay, I have capacity to control certain things in my life. This also may serve as a time for you to do some of those life administration tasks that are often piling up, at least I know for me in my to-do list on my notes app. For example, things like updating your budget or your spending plan, taking the time to drive that bag of clothes that you've been meaning to donate to the thrift store to actually donate them, spending a few hours organizing that junk drawer that has somehow morphed into a junk closet, right? Some of those things that might have just been weighing on you that you now have the time to do can give you that sense of agency and motivation of being able to start something and having control over something as well. Another tip, you do not have to do this on your own. Make sure you are leaning on your support system. Friends, family, professional colleagues, therapists, these are all good people to reach out to. And yes, seeking out people who have undergone a layoff, especially within the last few years, they might have a little bit more empathy for what it feels like to experience a layoff recently. You may want to reach out to people who've gone through similar things. The other thing when it comes to reaching out to friends, family, loved ones for support, it's pretty common that they may text you or call you and say like, oh, just let me know if I can do anything for you. When you are in the midst of a big life change and a big life event, it can be really hard to know how to respond to that. So I have a couple of ideas of ways you can say, yes, actually, I would like your help. Here is a tangible thing that I could use help with. If you need some tangible support, it's totally fine to say, as you know, I just lost my job. I'm going to be spending the next 3 afternoons working on my resume or applying for jobs. Could you help me out by doing XYZ? And for XYZ, let me give you some examples. Could you help out by running to the store and getting some of like the pantry basics for me? Could you help me by doing pickup and drop off for daycare for my kids? Could you just switch the laundry and fold whatever is in the dryer for me? Giving somebody a tangible item that you feel comfortable handing off that is actually going to free up space for you is a win-win, because if a person is reaching out to you and saying, let me know what I can do, so often we don't know how to respond to that. But if we think about it for a moment, what could I use help with so that I can continue on my job search? Get clear on what that thing is. Now, if you need more of that emotional support, less of that tangible support from friends or family, be honest there too. Say, look, I could just use a walk and talk, or I could use a phone call to just like vent and process what's going on. And you can be really clear with what you need in that conversation. You could say to them, I need to vent, but after I vent, I really want your support because I know you went through a layoff in the last year. Or you know what? I need to vent first, but I really could use your guidance. You're a whiz at looking at resumes. Would you mind reviewing mine, right? We can ask for these things. When we have people in our lives who are willing to help us out, that favor will be reciprocated. That is a part of a healthy relationship. Is sometimes you're in the giving stage, sometimes you're in the taking stage, and we know that what goes around comes around in these relationships. And when it comes to what to do next, when it comes to finding a new job, yes, of course, make sure your resume is up to date, make sure your LinkedIn is refreshed, doing all of those things that you need to do. But still, today, Deloitte says that 70% of jobs are found through networking. I'm not just talking about going to a networking event where you're passing out your business cards or giving somebody your email or connecting with them on LinkedIn. Sure, those things are great, but really thinking about who is in your current network, not just like the people you used to work with, but saying to your family, to your friends, hey, I lost my job in this particular field, or I have this particular skill set. I am open to any ideas you have. Please keep me in mind if you know your job is hiring. Or the next time you're at a dinner party, keep an ear attuned for anybody who is saying that they are hiring. It can feel so vulnerable to say, not only did I lose my job, but also I would like help finding one. But we want to help. I like to think that when we move toward a more nurturing, communal-based place that so many of us are craving, people want to help. If maybe you know that your sister-in-law's brother works in a similar field, but you don't know him that well, it's totally fine to reach out to your sister-in-law, say like, hey, do you think you could text me your brother's number? I'd love to just like bend his ear a little bit about what's going on and tell him a little bit about the type of work that I'm interested in, right? We just never know what types of connections might open up. So yes, for sure, apply to jobs the old school way, getting on LinkedIn, getting on Indeed and applying and going directly to certain websites and applying, but also get comfy with your network. Money, jobs, career, and our mental and emotional well-being are incredibly intersected. Thanks for taking the time to listen to these things. I hope that you're able to start picking a couple of things off of that list to start implementing. And if maybe you're here because you're a generous friend, a generous family member, and you're looking for different ways to support somebody who's gone through a job loss, do know that I've got lots of content about the way that our money and well-being is intersected. You can check it all out at mindmoneybalance.com.